Welcome to This Week in the PNFL. I'm your host, Mark Hill, and along for the ride are my two backups. Well, not really backups, but they are my left and right hand over here. We have on one side we have Dean Chambers. On the other side we have Mitch Grawl. How you doing, gentlemen?
Hey, doing
Do-
great. Always a second fiddle. Always second fiddle.
No, you know what? I got to change that up a little bit because you guys give a lot of, from what I've been hearing from the coaches, you guys give a lot of insight. All I'm doing is just directing traffic. So I'm just a traffic cop now. And also join us as our guest for this week's show is they're the Minnesota Vikings coach, Barney McDermott. How you doing, Barney?
Doing great, Mark.
Good,
Glad-
good. Doing good, doing good. So, we have a couple things we're going to talk about on this week's show. We know that we have the draft coming up this weekend as we're getting everything ready for that. So there's two things that we're going to talk about. One, we're going to talk about the current state of the players out there for the draft, kind of looking at the best picks at each position. Some of you guys have your own formulas that you're using when you decide to pick your players. Do you just look at the numbers, or do you look at the overall numbers, or you look at the individual numbers? Everyone has their own little different strategy. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to have Barney talk a little bit about his defensive play prowess, as was discussed early on, that his plays are so good, a couple of them got deleted out of the league because they were too good. So I didn't know you can make a play that was too good, but obviously we can. So, but kicking this thing off, we're going to go ahead and start off on the first segment. First segment is about the upcoming draft, as we mentioned earlier. So, what I'd like to do is have everyone kick this idea around, and with Barney being our guest, and I think actually, you know what, I'm gonna have Mitch start off, and then sandwich Barney in the middle, and then finish it up with Dean as far as their discussions or their ideas of the best draft pick, or if you guys want, just jump on in there. So we'll kick it off with you, Mitch.
Yeah, no, well, as I mentioned here on some of the other calls where we, dabbled a little bit into the draft, this draft is very interesting as I do my analysis. There are some positions that I think you can get some very good quality in. Those middle rounds. You don't have to necessarily, go for it all in the first round if you're trying to get certain positions. But there's one position to me where, if you need an immediate impact right now, there is one player at this one position that you've got to get. And that is a defensive end, Trayvon Walker. To me, he is by far the best overall talent in this draft. And I tell you, if you want a difference maker on your defensive line, that's the guy that you're going to want to get. To me, that he is by far heads and shoulders above others at his position. But I would say he's my number one overall talent. Doesn't mean that he'll be the overall number one pick. I would tell you he would be if I was the number one number one pick. But then again, I need a little extra help on the defensive line. But to me, that is the best overall player, and at a position where it's not quite as deep. So that's one of my takes on this, Mark.
All right, Barney, you're up next. What do you see?
Thanks a lot, Mitch. I've got the number 4 pick, and I was hoping he dropped the 4, but you're right. He's the number 1 guy in the draft.
I got number 3.
I know you do. We may have to trade. We'll see. No, he's really great. I'm pretty strong at defensive end, I think, although not according to your numbers, Mitch. But I think I'm pretty good. So I don't need him, but I would take him. I agree with you. Number 1. I think this draft is pretty darn deep. Guys will go in the second round that might be first round level players. I don't want to name names because I've got the 4th pick, but there's
Oh, do tell, do tell.
Yeah, no, you're going to
See, I have that luxury, Barney. I don't pick number 15,
Yeah.
so I could give out my top 10 if I wanted to, but I'm not because I'm hoping some of those drop to 15.
right.
But I'm taking 16 to 21, so I'm hoping this idea of second round picks being first round talent is true.
Yeah.
I think, I've got the fourth pick in the second round too, and I'm thinking I'm going to get a good player there. But, I think there's really good depth of talent, except at quarterback, maybe. So if you need a quarterback, you got to grab one of the two guys. I got to look up the names right now, but there were two that
Howell and Pickett, Barney. Is that what you're thinking of? Yep.
Howell and Pickett, especially if you got them, and you got a point, or two. Luckily, had luck on the Charlie's point raise thing. I think those guys could be really elite quarterbacks. And yeah, I think this is a great draft, and I think that it's going to be hard to make a mistake almost. It seems like the players are pretty clustered together in terms of being talented. So that's my take on it anyway.
So would you say?
I agree with you there, Marty, on those quarterbacks. I know there's been some chatter about the quality of quarterbacks in this draft, and yeah, I think after those first two, it definitely there's two that stand out, but those two that are in there, you give a few years here of training camps, and I think they're top 10 quarterbacks in the league. So
yeah,
I'm with you on that.
That brings me to the story that I want to report as a pre-draft story in this league, and it's how teams are handling the quarterback position, how they're viewing these quarterbacks that are in the draft. And I think we agree that Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett are pretty solid potential starters, and we're seeing some chatter in the email and the forum about this. What is interesting to look at, for example, some of the teams that are in need of a quarterback or making a change at the position have been addressing, and maybe they might be underestimating the value of these two quarterbacks in the draft. You look at Indianapolis is apparently going to go with some of the players they have on the roster and sign a free agent. And New England, I believe, traded for a quarterback. And Jacksonville, do we know who Jacksonville is going to start? Let me look at their roster and see if that is apparent. So I believe Jacksonville might have signed a free agent quarterback as well. So the first two teams that are picking in this draft are Indianapolis and Jacksonville, and clearly I would predict they're not going to pick a quarterback. That's the way it looks. So we don't know how far those quarterbacks will fall. Detroit made a trade trading one of their quarterbacks to Las Vegas, so I don't know if James is going to pick a quarterback with one of his picks. It wouldn't surprise me if he chooses not to do that either, but that remains to be seen. So, one of those two quarterbacks might be a good pick for someone if they fall further in the first round and maybe into the second round. So, those might end up being a pretty good value for someone if the team's drafting early in the draft and I picked them. And, after a few training camps, those guys are going to be solid starters. And I think that's an interesting story to look at. Again, how teams are addressing the quarterback position with the combination of trades and free agency and looking at the draft.
Okay, so looking at the different positions, actually, looking at the positions from what I've seen, as you guys mentioned earlier, there's depth in some positions, in others not so much. Quarterback, there's, like you said, there's only two players out there. I'm seeing from the linebacking core, it's a huge linebacking core, so there's probably some more players there that's available to the different coaches out there. Halfback, fullback, not fullback, wide receiver. That was what I was thinking about. That's a deep list out there. So one thing I wanted to ask you guys was going and don't tip your hand, but looking at each position as we go down the roster, each individual position. Can you kind of, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you guys rate the quality in each one of those positions? And then I have a follow-up question after that. So if you guys can just go through the list from what you see on there, starting with, we've already talked about, let's start with the cornerbacks. What do you guys think is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the cornerback level quality is from 1 to 10?
I'll tell you, for me, Mark, when I think overall, I would say, based on how I look at quarterbacks, I would say the talent level this draft, 5 or 6, kind of middle of the road. There's some good players in there, but it's not nearly as deep as some past drafts on the cornerbacks.
All right, Barney?
Interesting. I've really rated about 7 cornerbacks that I like. The average, it looks like, based on previous drafts, is about 1 per team, about 18 guys. So I'm hoping that by the 3rd round, maybe one of those 7 will still be available. But I think there's, it's there aren't a lot of super top-notch guys, but there are a lot of really good middle-of-the-road guys. You're not going to be find a number 1 or 2 cornerback in the 3rd round, but you're going to find a guy who can play for you.
Right.
And so I feel pretty good about the position. I'd give it a 6 or 7.
All right, Dean?
Yeah, I think about 7 is right. I actually have 11 players on my draft board spreadsheet, and of those 11, I have 7 of them in kind of a light green rating and 4 of them in yellow. Again, the yellow adequate, the light green is good, and if I put someone in dark green, that's like really good, and it turns out I don't have any really good on these. Like I said, 7 light green and 4 yellow. So I guess something in the range of the 7 rating would be about right.
All right. Now, for those people out there looking for backfield help, running backs and fullbacks, let's just lump those 2 together. What would you guys think the quality is in those 2 for the draft?
For me, there's one running back that stands out amongst the group.
Oh, don't say it. No, I'm picking 4.
I'm not going to say the name. I'm not saying the name. I'm saying there's a
No, don't say the names.
Stands out. There's a running back that stands out. Beyond that, the pool's pretty light. I mean, there's not a whole lot of running backs that I grade out that are very high this draft. So I'm going to say below a 5 for running backs.
Okay. Dean, Barney?
I would say, I don't know, 5 or 6 maybe. I mean, I only have 5 of them on my list, and there's one by the numbers that is definitely better of the 5, and there's one of those names in the list that someone might be kind of attracted to because of the name, what that means. But be interested to see if that player is a late round steal or gets drafted higher because of the name, and then be interesting. The one that's the best by the numbers probably will get drafted fairly early by someone.
Okay. Barney?
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher on the running backs than you other guys, but I agree there's one that stands out, and I've got like 5 guys on my board. I'm basically looking at the first 3 rounds. After that, I'm looking probably the highest pots or something.
But those 5 are the same 5 that are on mine.
That probably, I would bet they are. There are, speed, strength, EN, I think those 3 things. And then you look at agility. The acceleration is isn't a very narrow, both the acceleration and agility potentials are in very narrow bands, I think. So I don't think there's significantly enough difference to distinguish. But to me, speed and strength, and then EN. And I think maybe there's, I have 5 guys that I'm looking at in the first 3 rounds.
So I can't hold back. That best running back is Quadriaz Wadley. So whoever wants that running back, pick Wadley, and you're going to have a stud.
Wow, he just had to throw that out there, huh? Yeah. Watch somebody pick him up, and then what are you going to say?
I'm going to laugh if somebody drafts him at all in this draft.
All right, you know what? I don't know if we should go through the whole list or not. Let's look at the.
Maybe pick one or two more positions.
Okay. Let's look at safeties. Anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone?
There's number 2 player. So, there's one that stands out above the rest, I think. Although, I gotta punch it up here because I don't have them up.
I agree with you, Barney. I've got one that stands out. I've got 3 or 4 that I think would be solid, but one that I would consider a first-round talent.
Yeah, and again, I'd say there's good depth. Second round on, you're gonna still be able to find a decent safety.
Here's the question for both of you, though. The one that stands out, how much more value is that player, that one that stands out, over one of these 3 or 4 that are not too far behind?
Yeah, that's
if you're needing a safety.
Well, I'll tell you, based on my calculations, my numbers, the way I weight this stuff out, I have my top safety in the draft scored out at 1.299. Okay. My second safety in the draft, who, like I said, I don't consider a first-round talent based on the rest of the total draft pool, he scores out at 1.229. So 0.07 difference between my top safety and my second safety. So
a very, very tight window, basically. Okay.
That's why I say that there's depth in this draft, is because the players are pretty tightly bunched together in ability.
Right. All right. So I got one more I want to look at, and then that's going to bring up another question. Let's see, which ones have we talked about? Did we talk about the receivers already?
No.
All right, let's look at the receivers then. Let's pick that as the last one.
I've got that. When I look at wide receiver, and again, the way I look at things and grade things out, I've got 12 wide receivers that I think have first through third round talent in this draft, and so I think there's going to be an ability to get a good wide receiver, definitely. Into those, early mid rounds if you need one. But I would say the receiver pool's pretty solid, if you're looking for some talent this year.
Okay. All right, Barney, Dean?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I only have 4 guys rated, but maybe I'm not looking at receivers. If one of them fell to the third round or something, I would be interested. But I've got, about 12 or so guys that I've marked as potential guys that I would be interested in eventually. And usually there's like with cornerbacks, about 18 guys get picked at the position on average. That's a rough average. I didn't actually, do the numbers, but so that that it's a pretty good class.
Yeah, I'm looking at a similar number on my draft board, and I am noticing, well, with the exception of one that I listed here, every one of these guys, what it's worth, is a 63 or 64 strength, which is pretty good for a wide receiver. And there's some pretty good and interesting players. I don't know that there isn't really like a one that really stands out, but I'd say there are probably 3 or 4 that any one of them could be the first wide receiver picked, depending on who actually ends up picking one and what they prefer in the position.
Okay, so Last question that I have on this topic, and this is a general one. We talked about it a little bit in pregame show and during the pre-show. When we are looking at the players that are out here right now, and we've talked about the stats and the parity amongst all the players in the league, what's your opinion on having maybe the numbers being higher for your elite, like special elite players, or having them lower down so there's more differences between the two? And this is open to any one of you guys that wants to jump in for a quick, for about quick 30 seconds or so, your ideas on that.
Yeah. Hey, Mark. I will say this is something that I've, always kind of had a voice around creating more differentiation in the player ratings, and it's been good to see the last, few drafts, some of that come into play. Personally, I like to see that speed up a little bit more to where, when you're looking at each individual attribute of the players in each position, that there's more of a bell curve feel from like the person with the highest speed, down to the person with the lowest speed, and from attribute to attribute or strength. Maybe you've got a defensive, let's just say an offensive tackle. Yeah, maybe the top one or two of the draft pool has a 98 strength or 99 strength, but then it bell curve out, if you will, down to 88, or 87, where there's a differentiation between superstars, average players, and folks who would truly be the career backups. So I know we're moving in that direction, and so I'm glad we're going that way, but I like to see them go faster.
Okay, Dean, Barney.
I think what's going on is the way Charlie's doing the draft pools is kind of more evolutionary than revolutionary, and the change is very gradual. And I think what Charlie is hearing is some of the team owners are pushing more for what Mitch was just talking about, and some of the team owners maybe don't want the draft pools to be made what they perceive to be weaker than what they've been. And I think what Charlie is doing is kind of charting course. It's kind of in between that, so that's why the change is fairly gradual. I think the thing that could be done, and I don't think this would get a majority of most team owners, is we could just do a global edit and just revamp the entire rating system in an off season and then create the rookies accordingly, set to that scale. That's kind of a radical solution, but I think most team owners would not. I mean, that would get you immediately a lot more differentiation than we have if that were done, but I think most team owners would probably vote against that approach. So the only alternative to that approach is to do the very gradual change in these ratings, and I guess the debate there is how gradual to do it. And what I'm hearing from Mitch is that maybe it's a little bit too gradual, and he'd like to see it done in a little bit more of an accelerated fashion that's currently being done.
I like what Charlie's been doing, mainly because the league is really there's a lot of parity. For instance, Mark, your team, I think you only were negative about 20 points all year. Difference between points scored and points allowed, something like that. My team was similar, and yet we were 5-11. And I think, Dean, you were negative too, and you were in the Super Bowl. So
negative in 10-6, and won some close games and lost badly in a few games. So that made the ratings, that made the numbers of points allowed and points scored more negative than they would be.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah, because it was very a small window, but it was always just that one play or one or two plays that really set it up. So the 5-11, even though it was 5-11, the team played better than what the record showed, because it was just, my bugaboo has always been within the last 5 minutes. That's when I lose the game, in the last 5 minutes, last 2 minutes of the game. So it comes down to the play calling and play scheme versus the personnel.
I agree with that. I had the same problem this year. So this season. So I just like the parody. And I like what just to reiterate, I like what Charlie's doing, and I think it's going to work fine.
All right.
Yeah, the parody has been the standing headline of the show this past season. And yeah, when I was preparing to play you, Mark, this past season, I was not preparing to play a 5-11 team, and I was not approaching that as if you were a 5-11 team, because you really weren't, even if that was the one loss record.
Yeah, that was not. I mean, I had that long losing streak, but it was just like, what am I doing? It was one or two plays towards the end of the game, and I think there might have been one, or might have been a couple of them where I was just completely blown out, but most of them was one possession, either a touchdown or a field goal, something that was real close. They just turned it around, and then those turnovers at the end of the game. So it was just those little things that came down to what I think was the play scheme and the play calling. So, but yeah, I think overall the parity, I understand what Mitch is saying on his end, but I do kind of lean on like the same side as Barney, where you want to have that evolution go in. It's kind of like if you look at the real NFL, you had the players when the league first started out, but then as the seasons went on, you had better and better and better players. For me, I would like to see if they just have one of those impact players that came in, that freak of nature, like your Eric Dickerson. They just came into the league and took the league by storm. Your Earl Campbell, your Barry Sanders, your Calvin Johnson, those type of guys just came in and just said, here I am, deal me. Your Randy Moss, someone that's just like, how the heck do we start? If he can throw one of those guys out there, and that would be something that would really set the team or make the league a little bit more interesting, to have that one freaking nature. And maybe in the draft, it doesn't show in the draft, but when they do the bonus points upgrades or something like that, and he doesn't say who's going to get it, just all of a sudden he rolls the dice, and then boom, hey, look at how this guy went through training camp and he just turned into a complete freak, and there you go. So I think that could be something he could kind of kick around, just an idea to be tossed out there. So
here's a question, Mark. Could that be implemented by randomly choosing one drafted rookie each season, and that they would win, call it maybe like an ultimate boost, and just do one of these per season, because you don't want to inflate ratings, but one per season, and the one player that wins that mega boost, if you want to call it that, would be set to league max in all 8 of their ratings. So it would become, they'd still have to be trained to those ratings, but that could become that player that you're talking about. Would that be a way of doing it?
I think that maybe not the league max of 99s all the way across, but say
I mean the max allowed by our current rules. You look at the mid-max tab in the contract law. So quarterback 92, 84 with 96 strength. I'm not saying above the max. I'm saying that one player would be set at those league max for potentials.
I could see doing something like that, and maybe even to add it in even further, if you could have them set to the league max, but then have that one position that would be even higher. So say if the receiver's top for speed is 84, well, maybe he may go up to an 86 or an 87. Everything else would be set to that league max, where you can have that one attribute that can be maybe 1 or 2 points above the league max. Just something to kind of think about. So it'd be nice to have that one freaking nature out there. That's.
Yeah, I think Reggie Charlie would be kind of hesitant to do that, because if you're in the college league that Steve ran, he was sort of doing that. He created a handful of these players that are called blue chips, and they were like a few points in some of the ratings above the max, that kind of like that. But what happened is the top teams would recruit more of those, and we ended up having a couple teams in the league that had several of those players, and they were beating other teams like by scores of like 100-0. It may sound hard to believe, but you wouldn't have to do that too much in that advantage to have one team with 4 or 5 of these players in key positions, and suddenly you would see scores that would be well beyond the levels of parity that we'd been seeing. You'd have scores of like 52-14 with a team that might have like 2 or 3 of those as wide receivers and 2 or 3 of those as cornerbacks.
Or
Yeah,
what? Or what? Go ahead.
I was in that league, and I agree with you, Dean.
Or what if you throw?
I'll-
What if you throw a poison pill in there? Okay, his numbers are there. After a couple seasons, his numbers start to decline. You have those star players that come in 1 or 2 years, he's doing good, and all of a sudden he gets an injury or something like that, and his points start to go down, or it just kind of goes down over time. Earl Campbell, damn good running back. The pounding took its toll, and he came in as a top rated, but then he just kind of took that heavy drop.
Well, and this is what you're saying is precisely why I again, not that we change it overnight, because I think that would be too drastic. So I don't mean, hey, let's go and recalculate the ratings for everybody or whatever. But I think this is why we need to continue the path of creating more separations in these drafts. Because to your point, right now, I think Dean, your suggestion, right? Hey, what if we had a guy that was maxed out across all the the ratings at a position? Would that create what Mark's talking about? I would argue that's what we already have for a big chunk of our players. And I say this, and I'm going to send this out in the PNFL news probably right after the show, because I've been kind of working on it as we've been talking. But just going to give you an example. When I take the average of our top 25 quarterbacks, okay, so there's 18 teams, right? So we're not even talking, the starter for every team. We got probably some of the backups in there as well. But when you take the average of our top 25 quarterbacks across the league, and you compare the average of those in each attribute to the max rating in the league, this is what it comes out to be. Our top 25 quarterbacks average a 79 actual speed rating. The max is 81. So we're talking the average speed for our top 25 quarterbacks is 2 points away from being maxed. The average acceleration for our top 25 is 79. That's 2 points away from max. Agility, same thing, 79 and 81, 2 points away from max. But then here are the big ratings for the quarterback, right? The average strength rating, actual strength rating for our top 25 quarterbacks is 96. The max is 96. The average intelligence rating for our top 25 quarterbacks is 92. The max is 92. And then discipline average is 83. The max is 84. So we're -1 on the average discipline for those top 25. So one could argue we just about have, superstar studs in our top 25 in quarterbacks already. But it would be interesting to say if that top 25, that maybe what I just read out was the average of the top 5, quarterbacks in the league. And maybe the 25th quarterback, instead of an average rating of strength of 96, maybe theirs should be more around 93, or something. That's what I'm talking about out there. So anyway, I'll hush. I'm taking up too much time. So back to you, Mark.
All right. So we actually went way over on our time for this one, but I think there's a lot that we can sit here and look at and kind of kick around a little bit. And I think that will give the guys hopefully a little bit more insight. And if you might have had your plans already set for your draft, you might want to go ahead and take another look at it again. I think there were some good points that the guys put out there as far as what to look at. So as we're pivoting over to the second part, this is mainly for our guest that's here. Barney has created several defensive plays out there for the league. I'm sure that probably most of you guys are using them. We know that there's been some that have been taken out, which we kind of joked about a little bit. But Barney, just trying to get an understanding of philosophy. What, with your time in playing the game, what goes into your plans as far as coming up with a strategy for your defensive plays? And want to have Mitch and Dean jump in there right along with you.
Okay. Um, the first thing is I spend a lot of time, and this is the most fun part of the game for me, which is why I do it. I spend a lot of time in the play editor. And you spend time in the play editor, you learn how the offense attacks, and you decide how to react on defense. You have to consider the game is played in 3 dimensions: the height, the length, and the width of the field, and then time. So you've got it, and I think most people don't take time into consideration. So when I bring up time, it's because I want to have my players near, and I'm talking about the passing game here. But and the same goes for the running game. But when a player's about to, when the pass is thrown and the player's about to catch the ball, that little circle comes up, and you got to have somebody near there, or else it's a completion. So that's the first thing that I think about when I'm thinking about defense. So when I'm looking at an offensive play that I can't stop, or I have trouble stopping, I'm going to say, okay, I want to put a zone guy there to be there at the time that the ball is going to arrive. And you can do that in the play editor by, single clicking through the play. And you can see at what point in time, say the ball arrives, and you can have your defender, and this is not a man-to-man defender. This will be a point zone guy or a zone guy, arrive somewhat basically be able to arrive in the circle. So that's one of the things I do, and I don't know if anybody or everybody does that. Dean, or I don't know if Mitch does many plays, but Dean, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that, because one of the things I kind of dealt with in my own defensive play development this past season was thinking about that the KC slot plays are pretty effective, and I've been using those at times against other teams. What happens if someone uses those against me? Am I going to be ready for that? So I started playing with some ideas in the play editor on some defenses, and I did do that. I did look at putting either regular zones or point zones on that spot. And I hadn't been really paying much attention immediately to some of the plays you were creating, Barney, but I created some of those plays and submitted them, and I submitted those for like 2 weeks because I was looking at one team on my schedule that I thought would try to use a lot of those KC slot those KC slot passing plays against me, their time passes. So I submitted those, and then I got around to looking at some of the other. You had created some pass short plays that seemed, I get the impression they seemed designed to stop those, and I looked at those, and again, I hadn't looked at your plays before I created some of the ones I did. That I think some of mine were run left and pass short, but I looked at some of yours. It looked like you were trying to take the same approach to defending against those KC slot plays as I was using. Like we both came to the same conclusion on how to stop that stuff. Yeah. And I came to that idea because many years ago in the old school leagues, there was someone who I played that ran, and it was allowed back then under the rules, who ran short, very effective time passing plays pretty much on first and second down exclusively. So when I played him that week, and that was in the days when you could like redesign your entire playbook for the week, I created defenses like that, and I ended up getting like, I think 2 or 3 interceptions against him, and won that game like 42-14 because I really did a pretty good job of covering his time passes. So yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the 3 dimensions, and when I'm approaching designing offensive plays, it's kind of the same thing. I think of the width of the field and depth of the field. I think of that as the space, because you send receivers in different routes, they go to different spaces, and then the timing. I mean, we think of timing in time passes, but in check receiver passes, the timing is just as important. Where is the receiver going to be when the quarterback checks him?
That's exactly right, because if you're throwing a sideline pass, you don't want the receiver to run out of room before the quarterback throws the ball. You got to give them enough room to make the catch. So the timing is very important, both on offense and defense, I think. And you brought covering those slot passes, which are the demon spawn. But in my opinion, the way you cover them, you got to cover them from underneath. I mean, you can't have your defensive back come up from behind and make the play. It's really hard. The defensive back has to either make it from the side or from underneath. So basically you have a guy hanging in a short zone underneath, or you have your defensive back, delay a little bit, stop and wait, and that creates other problems. But you sure can stop that slot play.
Right. And what I did with some of the ones I did is I first designed them in the play editor to stop the slot plays, and then I tested them against general offenses in general and see how they did. And if their numbers are still good, then I submitted them, and some of them passed. And if their numbers were terrible, because maybe they're good at stopping the slot plays but not very good at stopping other things, then they didn't make it.
Right. Yeah, you have to test them. I test them extensively. I wouldn't even consider sending something in unless I've done at least 500 plays against it, a variety of plays. I don't want to put, because you never know what you're going to get. Anybody could, use any game plan and any profile during, change up at any time. So you still have to be ready for anything, but you can say, okay, this guy likes to do, like Dean likes to do that slot play. You better be able to stop that. So that's one of the considerations. When I'm making a defense, it's basically to stop somebody's great play. And then I just try to make it so that it also stops most of the other good plays. And that takes a lot of testing. And that's, basically the concept.
Yeah, and the key to both defense and offense is the real key with new plays is the testing. The more testing you do, and the more those plays still put up good numbers against a wide variety of different teams and different game plans and profiles, then the better they ultimately will be and more useful in week to week, our games week to week.
Right.
The testing is really the most important aspect of it, and I don't know to what degree some others realize that.
Well, I will tell you this from someone who doesn't create a lot of plays, because as I mentioned on, I think one of the shows recently, I get frustrated when I create plays. So I'm thankful for the work that you all do, and it's great to have coaches in the league that do get a lot of enjoyment from the play creation part. I know that for me, when I see a play, coming out in the custom pool that you've made, Barney, I typically give it a quick look because it's usually going to be good, or something that at some point I'll probably end up using. So I'm glad you started building some defenses for those annoying slot plays. I greatly appreciate that.
Well, thanks for the compliment. And yeah, I'm going to be working. That's what I'm looking at defensively now is stop. Those plays are, really tough to stop. So congratulations to Dean for creating them. But they aren't going to last for that much longer. So enjoy them while you can, Dean.
Oh, wow. Okay. He's putting down the gauntlet. So now for these coaches that are just deciding, okay, let me dip my toe in the water. What would they start off with? Basically follow your formula, take a look at what's going out there and then try to do a lineup for it. Would they do better with a 3-4 or 4-3 or you just say, for example, I'm going to write a play. I want to make a defensive play. What's the first thing I need to know?
How the play editor operates.
Besides that.
Okay. You study, you look at what I would do. Okay. You're basically, when you're designing a defense, you pretty much have a play or a few kinds of plays in mind to stop. Because you can't stop everything. You've got to pick something out to stop. And so you start with that. And you try to, and let's say it's a pass play. And so you want to have a guy near the circle when the play, in the time that the pass is thrown, you've got to have a guy near the circle, whether it's your man-to-man defender or a zone defender or read defender. And once you've got that part down, now you've got to make the rest of the players fit in with what you've just done. So if you're and you do that kind of by testing. If you see I'm weak against the inside run, you mess around with your defensive line a little bit, or I can't stop the sweep. So maybe you have an outside blitzer, or you got to position your man-to-man on the halfback in a better position than he is now. I mean, you learn as you do it in the play editor how to adjust to the various things that are beating your defense.
And then just practice. Take their best play. If it doesn't work, just go back and just keep manipulating it until you can come to a stop.
What I will do, for instance, what I would do is I might create a defense. I think, this is going to work against some play. I don't know. We'll say the B slot play. And so I make sure it works against the B slot play, but then I want to see if it works against everything else. And I'll try to make the other players do various different things to see what seems to work the best against not just B slot maybe, but everything that you might see, or the best plays. There's a set of plays that people use pretty consistently, and you want to be able to stop those. And so you really test your stuff against that and see if it works. And if it works, you can put it in your game plan. And I'm not saying this is an easy process. You got to love being in the play editor, as far as I'm concerned, because it's going to take some time to really develop something.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's not easy, and as Mitch was saying, he talked about the frustration. Frustration is part of the process. It's easy to get very frustrated with you. You make some plays, you adjust them, you test them, you adjust them, you test them, and sometimes I have a play and say, I've adjusted and fixed this thing like 7 times, and it's still not getting me the numbers I want. And sometimes you just abandon that play and you try a different idea.
You have to throw out what you think is a good play. You spent an hour testing it or whatever, and now you've just wasted that time. So yeah, it's frustrating.
Right.
So that's why I depend on you guys to come up with the great plays. That way I can spend my time on what I enjoy, and that is the actual game planning and the preparation and the analysis piece of the game.
And for every play that succeeds and we submit, there's at least one or more plays that didn't pan out, that didn't succeed, and don't end up getting submitted.
At least, I would say it's even more than that. I've rejected a lot more than I've created.
All right.
Yeah.
So basically, just keep plugging away at it. So
it's work. It's like designing drugs in the real world. You design the drug and then you test it, and most of them don't make it. There's like 3 trials, I think, and most of them don't even make it to the 3rd trial.
right.
So
then you have that one that hits.
You got to wait you've got to keep working till you get one that hits.
And maybe this might be a little more unique to offense and defense. I don't know. Barney might disagree with this, but some of my better plays have started off as kind of like experiments in the play editor, where I'll try something radical and say, what does this do? And I test it. And then, like, for example, I had one passing play that it was a short passing play, and I tried to send the receivers deep as much as the rules allow. And when I first tested it, was like 30% completions for 17 point something yards. I thought, well, that's good, but the completion percentage is too low. And I adjusted it to the point where I got it was more like 55% completions for 10 point something yards. And then I realized, this is useful now. So some plays begin as kind of an experiment to end up morphing into something that's useful.
Absolutely. That's usually happens when I try to draw offensive plays. I'll get the same kind of results, and I'll play around with them, and then I'll get the standard 50% for 10 yards, which isn't good enough, but you could use it if the defense allows for it. There are a few really good offensive plays, obviously, and those are the ones, if you're looking at it from the defensive side, you got to stop those.
All right. So we are well over our time, but a lot of good information that's out there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. It's just like all the previous shows we had in the off season. It's just so much detail and information in there. I'm enjoying just sitting back, just listening. So as we come to wrap this up, I'd like to thank Barney for coming on to the show this week, and hopefully we can get him back on again to talk some more defensive strategy and talk a little bit more about the league. So thank you very much for coming out. So I'll be on the show today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, and Dean, as we come to wrap this up, actually, let me go ahead and round the world. Any final words that you have over there, Barney?
Other than this is a great league, and I enjoy playing in it, and I hope to continue playing it for a long time, and I hope to be able to draw some plays that can stop that slot play. And that's all I got.
All right, Dean, what do you have? Final words.
Well, it's interesting that Barney mentioned creating defenses to stop certain offensive plays are effective. And as I've been saying to others, that there's kind of an arms race that goes on between offense and defense, where we create defenses to stop the more effective offenses. We create offenses to break the better defenses. And that is something that continues to go on. And that's why a lot of our older plays on both sides of the ball don't really get used much of anymore. And we're evolving to newer plays that are being developed, and that process will continue going forward. I think it keeps the league kind of lively and interesting as far as plays go. And even for those who don't design plays, they will have to keep up with what plays are working, which ones are not, because if you just simply use the same game plan that you did 5 seasons ago, you probably won't win as many games this season as you did 5 seasons ago.
Exactly. Mitch, take us home. I know you got something that you have to say. You've been sitting over there kind of quiet for a little bit.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I think now for, the second or third season in a row, I am predicting a massive rebound year for the Vikings and Coach McDermott. So I'm going to call it now. Vikings are back in the playoffs in the AFC. This year, so I'm going to go ahead and call that now. And we're right here on the verge of the draft. So guys, there's only one thing left to do, and that's let's get it.
Oh, wrong one. Wrong one.
Thanks, Nick, for the vote of confidence. Let's take it.
Mark's playing Lawrence Welk to take us out.
Hey, that was another show. Just trying to get that one out there. Just wanting to test you guys.
My grandmother.
Hey, just getting you guys tested. So, see you on the next one, guys.
It's funny.